when I went out on the ranges, I took nothing out there except what the government told me to take out there. When I came off the ranges, I brought nothing off the ranges except my memories. I didn't bring any photographs. I did not bring any logbooks or anything. All that was belonged to the government. When I left the ranges to go to Vietnam, I packed up only my personal belongings, my brogans, my shoes, and said my prayers and thanked God that I was still alive and headed off for Vietnam in May of '67.
So are you okay to answer, for me to ask you, is this fictional or did this actually happen?
Everything in the books is true and happened to me personally, including Hall photon theory, which is in the appendix of books 3 and books 4. While I was out there, I got to see, I got closer to their propulsion system than any human I know of. I got to see their scout craft, their deep space craft. Their technology their scout craft and their deep space craft are built with a double hull, and in between those two hulls, on the scout craft, there's like 1,000 miles of fiber optic windings, and they're done in different coils. And then the propulsion system generates subatomic particles. There are more force fields generated by the subatomic particles than what Einstein knew about. Einstein and current physicists think that there are only 4 force fields, but when you looked at their coils, as I show in my books, it's a simple matter to show that there have to be at least 7. I could believe there were 19, but I'm certain there are at least 7. And for example, one of the set of coils was an outer set that encompassed their scout craft, which was ellipsoidal, egg-shaped. And when they were just sitting on the desert, powered down, it looked like the fuselage of an airplane. When they powered up, it would fuzz over because that force field interacts with light. Now, I used to watch them when they were totally powered up, lift up off the desert in total silence with no sparks or anything until they were, say, only 20 or 30 feet above the sagebrush, and then move a distance of like 7 miles at an average speed of more than 8,000 miles an hour and stop and then sit down. They could do it so fast that they could do it so fast that your eye couldn't follow them. You know, your eye can't follow an object. So it would seem like they'd gone here and then blinked over there, but really they'd moved that fast. Well, if you tried to do anything like that with a rocket sled, you would liquefy steel. The force of acceleration when they were accelerating was more than 15,000 times the force of gravity. But when they were fuzzed over in that force field, they could just sit there the way we are sitting here today. So they could go and stop because it was moving the whole thing as a unit. And then when they sat down, they would turn down the force field and get off. Well, you need you can't do that with the 4 force fields, see? And I used to, as a weather observer, you're always timing things and measuring distances and stuff. And they could do that in just the most ho-hum fashion. The suits that they wore at night put off a fluorescent light and allowed them to levitate. But they had to balance themselves when they did so. The power pack was up behind the neck on the shoulders where you would think it would be. The children, of course, used to be very athletic, used to be very artistic about it. The older people might only rise up a mere 9 inches and float and stuff. When I first saw them, I thought that I was dreaming, and that's why they called that area Dreamland. Dreamland is not Area 51. Area 51 is Groom Lake. Area 52 is Papoose Lake. Dreamland is another place. And that, when you went out there at first, I thought I was sleepwalking or dreaming, and then I thought I was nuts. Then when I realized that I was looking at real things, then I thought I was hallucinating. I refused to accept that those were real, that there were real people. It was the first 6 months getting used to it was extremely emotional. In my books, if it seems like I'm afraid a lot of the time, that's because the first 6 months I was afraid a lot of the time.
So Charles, have you heard of Bob Lazar?
Yes, I've heard of Bob Lazar.
And what are your thoughts on Bob Lazar?
Well, speaking on camera, I only wish to speak about my own personal experiences. or things in the public sector that I've, seen. And so I won't make a statement about Bob Lazar because I don't, because I only wish to talk about my personal experiences,
All right.
speaking on camera.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, in your talk, you mentioned a third race, which were small grey aliens, which I think you said that you only saw at a distance and didn't really interact with.
That's correct, but those the small grays are the children of the adult grays. We have to change our way of thinking if you're going to interact with the aliens. The grays live roughly 150, 200 years, maybe as long as 300, I'm not sure. Well, that means childhood is longer for them. The tall whites likewise. Well, see, they learn to trust their children more than we do. Their children can breathe the air, and their adults cannot. The gray adults need a breathing device, and so it's very seldom that you see the adult grays here on the Earth. They're terrifying. I never want to be around a gray. They're very arrogant. However, the small grays have the saucer-shaped craft run by the small grays. Those are the children on board running the craft. See, the older children and the young teenagers who can still breathe our air. So, for example, the craft that crashed at Roswell, which was a gray craft, did not have adult grays on the craft. It had only older children on the craft or young teenagers. And at Roswell, there were 3 saucers. There was one that crashed on the 2nd of July, and then there were 2 that were out looking for it on the 7th of July, 1947. And see, when an American fighter took up, and they were in search formation, so they'd turned off the outer set of coils, because both the grays and the whites are using a similar approach of having double hulls and fiber optics in between those 2 hulls, and running subatomic particles in those fiber optics. I don't know which ones. And see when they turned off the outer set of coils, they have to drive it like a baby buggy because they can feel the forces of inertia. They can't actually begin high-speed maneuvers until they've fuzzed over, until they've powered up the outer set of coils. Well, when an American F-84 shooting star with live ammunition took up pursuit and asked for permission to begin a live firing pass on the 2 gray saucers, they panicked. Those are children on board who are running the place. Those aren't battle-hardened warriors. They're just young teenagers. And the result, when both craft wanted to power up, because the outer field would protect them from bullets, but powered down it will not. They have no protection from bullets. The craft are very fragile. It was equivalent to the 2 craft crashing into each other. Well, the one on the north wandered off to the north and crashed at Corona. That's the Roswell saucer. Mm-hmm. The one on the south, it wobbled off to the plains of St. Augustine, but it didn't crash in the plains. It crashed on a mountain overlooking the plains. It wasn't found till roughly 1979, and everybody on board had lived for a while but had never been found and died eventually. So the craft they were actually looking for was the craft that was on the plains of St. Augustine, New Mexico. So you see there were 3 craft involved. The first debris field that the Army Air Force went out to look for was where the 2 search craft had in effect crashed into each other by powering up those fields. Those fields extend for a very long way beyond the craft and will protect it from bullets, everything, from anything the fighter plane had. Well, see, that was the first debris field, and that's why the Army Air Force didn't find any of the other craft, because they were looking in the wrong place.
So the Greys then, presumably there were some at the base that you were stationed at?
No, the Greys have their own area, and that's not in my books.
Right.
The tall whites and the Greys are natural enemies, like dogs and cats. In Indian Springs, there are only whites.
Right.
Okay.
So the Greys then, have they been given bases sanctioned by US Black Ops in the same way that the tall whites have?
I don't know.
Right.
Okay,
right.
I don't know.
And do you know, I've done quite a bit of research into the abduction program, which is allegedly ran by the Greys. Can you comment on that at all?
No, I don't. I don't like, I never want to be around the Greys. I would be, see, if I were in Nevada, like if I were up in Mount Charleston or Lee Canyon, and I came across some of my friends, the whites, and since they live 10 times longer than I do, they've only aged 3-4 years versus my 40. See, I wouldn't have any problem talking with my old friends, the tall whites, like the teacher, Range 4 Harry, and so on. I would still observe the same rules. If I saw them, I would stop and stay where I was and let them approach me. I would never pursue. And but see, because they're friendly, they're very much like humans that way. And of course, the Norwegians with 24 teeth, gee, if you weren't a dentist, you couldn't tell the difference between them and us.
It's a very human-like thing.
Yeah, but the Greys, I never want to see the Greys.
Right.
I didn't. I had to for a while, but which I won't go into detail. But there was a time in early '67 when I had to, but I never talked with them. I never made friends with them. I never want to see the Greys again.
Is it true that they can kind of telepathically almost read your thoughts and get in your inside your psyche, or?
They're not telepathic. What they are, like the tall whites, their electronics allow them to tell what you're thinking and to place thoughts in your mind. But if you meet one without the electronics, and if they don't speak English, you're strictly back to hand signals. Also, their hearing is at least as good as that of a dog, and their eyesight is at least as good as that of a cat, and their vocal cords allow them to make all those sounds. And so that means that they can stand like in a line, and I speak from direct experience, and they can be talking to themselves in their language, using sounds too high for a human to hear, and they're well aware that's the case, and communicating, and it'll seem like they're telepathic, and really they're just talking to each other using a very high voice. Now, their electronics allow them to put thoughts in your mind, and it's adjustable in volume. It has a limited range. The longest that I ever saw the whites do it on me was at 1.25 miles, and then it sounded like a radio going in and out, losing the signal. But if they're up close and there's several of them and they're all transmitting, it's like being in front of a speaker at a rock session. You can't hear yourself think. It'll be so disruptive. So usually when they came, I preferred that only one of them transmit and the others receive only. But if they were adjusted properly, you could actually hear them talking to each other, as I describe in my books, depending entirely on how their electronics were set, because they could send only, receive only. On one occasion, when Pamela was panicking and talking with the teacher, and she was afraid of me before she had overcome her fears, she was telling the teacher what I had been thinking a couple days before, and I estimate that she must have been receiving my thoughts at a distance of 5 miles.
Right.
But on that, so they can receive only, and so you're not always sure when they're talking to you.
Do you know how this works, Charles? Is it done through the pineal gland, or the third eye, as they call it? Do you know how it interfaces with the mind?
As I describe in my books, they greatly preferred to have a clear shot at your temple. Either temple would do. But if you were facing them directly, it would still work. But if they had their choice, they would prefer to come around to the right, have somebody come around to the right, and read the thoughts off your temples, where they get a strong signal. However, because it's electronic, it's subject to electrical interference. So, for example, for them, it works best if you're just sitting quietly and not moving your feet or your hands, especially your feet. Because remember how the brain is organized, and I'm not a medical doctor, you have so-called fissures on the brain, and on one side you do the thinking, and on the other side are the cells that control the psychomotors. And if you're moving your feet or arms, then the cells that are running the psychomotors they're putting out signals too and interfering with everything. So it worked best if you could just sit there quietly and let them read your mind. If you were sick, if you were tired, if you were terrified, it did not work at all, because the human mind can think several different ways. Once you panic, the blood flow and the way you think changes the way it works. Or if you're really tired, it'll change the way. So it works best if you're well rested and they can just come in quietly and just read your thoughts that way.
So can they also almost anesthetize you and put you out, as would happen
They
in a
can
typical abduction?
They can easily electronically hypnotize you.
Right.
It's no surprise, virtually every radar engineer for the U.S. Navy that I've ever talked to has a similar story about being up on the radar mast, having the radar mast broadcast, and having the radar waves hypnotize him, you know. One guy was told how he was up on the mast of a destroyer, and one of the antenna from the carrier Enterprise 50 miles away broadcast, and he was in the beam, and it took him 2 hours to get him off because it hypnotized him electronically, kind of locked him up. And so, see, they could do that. They could hypnotize you and unhypnotize you. However, if you understood what was happening, you could break out.
Right.
Many people who are magicians or who are hypnotists, the most common reason, I'm told, for a hypnotist to be sued is because he'll have a subject say and tell him to act like a chicken, and then have everybody laugh, and then unhypnotize and tell him to forget it, and then unhypnotize him, and then the guy will be able to break through that and remember. The trick is to go for the guy who wants to remember that, to go to a very warm place, a comfortable place, and lay down and just let his mind wander and let the brain reconnect the memories. And the first guy that did that I'm told of, that I've read about, was back in 1925 in Germany. And I describe that in my books as well, and that's what missing time is, because, you know, as I describe in my books, they could come and if they wanted to bring a group of new people around and show them a human, they didn't have to just walk up to you, see? They could wait until you were, till I'd finished my weather report, my balloon release, and then hypnotize you, and then walk out with the people and do their thing while you're standing there hypnotized, and then you know, send everybody else away, unhypnotize you, and you'd never know what happened. It's just that it's just that for some reason you couldn't remember what you'd been doing for 20 minutes.
This presumably is exactly how they can perform an abduction.